Mantastic and Fantastic, and tonight I'm going to be doing a review for Halloween Xiang Mei, which I have posted on my website, and this whole article you see here will be included in the YouTube description down below, so I strongly suggest you either read alongside the video or separately, so on and so forth, because it will contain a lot of information that I may not necessarily address directly. So Halloween Xiang Mei has been now released in North America. People are either rolling frantically for her or spending 500,000 monster points. And I want to take this time to examine her strengths and weaknesses, determine her spot in the current game meta, as well as possibly shedding some insight as to whether or not you should be making this purchase if you're not lucky enough to roll her. So a little bit of background about Xiang Mei. So Xiang Mei, like Halloween Xiang Mei, is based off of a Fire 300,000 monster point version, and at the time of her release, it basically shook up the entire meta. Like, it was a leader that we've never seen before, something with such amazing power, damage output, survivability, but she obviously had some criticisms because she had a very restrictive team build, and she did not actually last very long in terms of a top tier leader, mostly because of the Heart Cross meta that came out. And this is not to say that she is weak, it's more so to say that she is not as powerful as the Heart Cross leaders. You still can clear plenty of content with a Xiang Mei team, but it's just going to have a tougher time in certain annihilation level content. And you have to always take those tier lists with a grain of salt because they measure different dungeons that we may not even have yet, so on and so forth. So just take those with grains of salt because Xiang Mei is still powerful. So I want to just examine how the Dark One fits into all of this and whether or not she is stronger or more viable. Now, at a glance, Halloween Xiang Mei is the exact same as her fire equivalent, except that you replace the fire row with a dark row, and her active skill can no longer override dark orbs. Otherwise, she's the exact same. Still 6 random heart orbs generated with a 1-turn haste on a 7-turn cooldown, and she does grant the same stats except to devils instead of healers. So she ends up being a 2.25 times health, 81 times attack leader for devil types. Ideally you want to be dark though. So basically this handy little chart here shows your multiplier at varying number of heart combos. So you do have a certain degree of damage control to a certain extent, and of course you can always elect to make the row or matching more or less dark orbs. So the pros of Xiang Mei, or Halloween Xiang Mei, is obviously the nice leader skill. You do have a durable team with very high attack, which can stack rows, and she does have high base recovery, so if you build your team intelligently, you will have sufficient recovery, along with using the recovery badge. So you have to keep in mind that, like, yes, you can build a Halloween Xiang Mei team that has no recovery, but that is not intelligent, and I presume that everyone who watches these videos are very intelligent, so you won't fall into that trap. Her active skill allows you to form a system-like team, which I will describe in greater detail further down, and the nice thing is, Dark Devils are plentiful. They're in a huge amount of abundance, and the thing is, with Halloween Xiang Mei, you do not have to build her the same way as her fire sister or fire cousin, because of the fact that you have such a bigger sub pool to draw from, because Fire Xiang Mei was forced to use very restrictive subs, and people were thinking that that was the best, because it technically was the best options you had, but it's not optimal. If you had to choose better subs, you would have chosen better subs. The Attacker Killer Awakening grants you bonus damage to attackers, but on that same hand, you might have difficulty with certain bosses with absorption mechanics. And I think she's prettier than her fire cousin. Maybe it's because of the broomstick, maybe it's because of the other girl in the background. Who knows? Regardless, that's just a personal opinion. So, the cons of Halloween Xiang Mei is that she is vulnerable to binds. She can be, like, in this age currently, we have so many top tier leaders that have bind immunity, and by being vulnerable to binds is a weakness that you have to address in higher end content, especially if you're playing higher levels of arena. You need to have someone to deal with binds, so you have to dedicate either a sub or active or something of that degree to fixing or correcting those binds. She has not very much uses as a sub. That's more so my personal opinion as well, because I don't think a pure Heartmaker is that strong of a sub, because you rather, yes, you can make hearts, but if you can't make your offensive orb at the same time, not such a great value. And this is perhaps the most important con of all. Halloween Xiang Mei is powerful, but at the time of her release right now, she is actually at a weaker point than Fire Xiang Mei was at her release. Halloween Xiang Mei is actually stronger because of all these pros that she has, like the Dark Devils, and basically Dark typing is superior, but she's entering the meta at a lower point than the Fire Xiang Mei at her release. And the fact that she costs 500,000 monster points for what is quote-unquote a weaker leader based on what the current meta is may have you rethinking whether or not it's really worth it or not. And the other con is obviously it's an 8-star collab role, so it's very rare. So it's hard to acquire, it's expensive to acquire, it's also entering the game at a weaker or a lower point than Xiang Mei was to begin with. So in regards to how many Dark Rows are enough, you basically need to have at least 4.2 to break even in terms of math, because as lined up here, you gain different amounts for linked orbs because the multiplier is lower, every unique combo is 25%, so on and so forth. So team building options, and this is where a lot of my focus will be emphasized on, and I want to clarify that just because Fire Xiang Mei had the archetype of duplicates of herself, a Uriel and a Gadius, does not mean that is the only way you can play her. Because if she didn't have that healer restriction, you would use different subs. Because Gadius and Uriel were actually not that good. They were not really the best subs. Like, Uriel's auto heals are kind of wasted. Gadius had no skill bind resist. He had a lackluster board change because you had to use it in conjunction with Uriel, so on and so forth. Like, it's just, you don't have to have that. And just because Dark Devils do not have a direct replacement for Uriel and Gadius does not mean Halloween Xiang Mei is going to be weaker. In fact, she is stronger because you have much better cards to draw from. You don't have to be as dependent on skill inheritance. Yes, you could still build her the same way. You could have duplicate Xiang Meis on your team. You could have something similar to Uriel, similar to Gadius, but you don't have to do that. And that's what I really want to stress. You don't need to have those subs. So with the 2.25 times health multiplier and no recovery here, as well as the options using Devils, you have to be conscious of your recovery. Because Fire Xiang Mei had fire healers, you obviously have naturally high recovery. Devils don't always have the highest of recovery. However, if you use a few subs of high recovery paired with your dual leaders and you have 297s, the recovery badge, you should have more than enough recovery. Just don't make unintelligent decisions and bring subs with 0 recovery 4 times. Like, just use some logic, use some common sense. That's all I ask for. So these are what I consider the higher tier subs. Like, these are stronger, and you should really, if you're thinking of purchasing, at least possess several of them because they will make your life a lot more powerful or a lot more easy when you're playing harder content. So you have Awoken Pandora and you have Ultimate Evolution Pandora. And both Pandoras have that very tasty Recover Bind Awakening that can be used if they're not bound to clear binds from your team. You can use various heart generators to form that heart row, as well as having powerful awakenings. You have lots of time extend with the Ultimate Evolution Pandora, and she also has huge base recovery, the Ultimate Evolution Pandora. So if you are finding yourself struggling for recovery, you should use this Pandora because you can use her, you can use health like RCV latents, and you will have more than enough recovery. However, if your recovery is in a good place, you should use Awoken Pandora because you have that haste component on your active, and I'm going to explain how a system works further down, but that haste is very important for cycling your actives. Next is Akachi. And Akachi is now pretty much one of the best dark subs in the game. Like, he got a new evolution, got more awakenings, got better base stats, and he has perhaps one of the strongest actives in the game because he combines Dark Orb Generation, Heart Generation, and he enhances Dark. So he combines Orb Generation and Damage Enhance. With Akachi, you may not necessarily have to run a damage enhancing sub because of the fact that his power is so great with that Orb enhancement. Next is Gremory, and Gremory is probably the best option you have for bind clearing. She has bind immunity, she has a bind clearing active, but her bind clearing active also generates dark and hard orbs, which is what you want. So she's basically doing everything you want, and the only downside is she's just hard to roll because she's a 6-star Godfest exclusive. And next is Cecile and Armored Batman, and these two subs are your only natural devils who generate dark orbs and hard orbs. So this is important to keep in mind because you have to either use skill inheritance to find a board changer, or you basically have to run without one. So you're most likely using skill inheritance unless you were lucky enough to pull these collab golds. So they're very powerful. Armored Batman is a much more offensive oriented, where Cecile is a bit more utility based on their awakenings. Armored Batman combos with Pandora, Cecile combos with Grizzar, so on and so forth. Bind clearing subs. Now, these subs are only used if you need some way to deal with binds, and that is only important, obviously, if you're playing, say, like Arena or Dungeons where your leaders will be preemptively bound, or your Pandora, for instance, cannot be utilized with the Recover Bind on her row. Now, I'm just going to basically touch on how they all work. So Halloween Alarane is one of the strongest because she has a lot of utility. She does have 4 turns of bind removal on a 7-turn cooldown, but she also provides haste. And this haste can help complete your system, and I'll explain the system more later, but that haste is important because even if you don't need the bind clear, you can use it for the haste in itself. In addition, it has a lot of utility awakenings, it has skill bind resist, it has recover bind as well, so you have options with her, and you can even inherit something on top of her if you don't necessarily need the bind recovery and you want the utility. No Bung Aga, who I never pronounced properly, is another viable bind clearer, but I don't think he's a bit riskier to a certain extent because his active will spawn 6 Dark Orbs at random, and it's that randomness that can be detrimental because if you spawn your Dark Orbs randomly, you can override Hard Orbs, and you may not be able to activate. So there is a bit of risk when you use his active. However, he is still bind immune, so you could inherit something more viable on top of him. Amir is a farmable option, so for those who don't have these rare machine pulls, you can use him. And Sleeping Beauty is a more common pull from various rare machines. Obviously, Sleeping Beauty and any of her incarnations that have devil typing work, but she's basically a more budget option that has the ability to clear binds as well as generate hard orbs. Just keep in mind that she competes with Pandora for those tasty wood orbs. Now, orb changers. And Halloween Xiang Mei is obviously a naturally strong card on her own team. You can use her to help form that system. You can use those high base stats, with especially that recovery. And it is powerful, but it's not mandatory to your success. So that's why I just put her not in the higher tier sublist, because I don't want to mislead people into think that you must have duplicates of her to succeed. Next is Halloween Layla, and she produces a full horizontal line of Dark Orbs at the bottom. And it's at the bottom that's problematic because normally you pool orbs at the bottom, and by creating a row at the bottom, you just kind of wasted those pooled orbs, so not the best, but she does have 3 dark rows. Halloween Chiyomi is a very good option because it does offer a quick 5-turn wood to dark orb change, and she does have a dragon killer. However, if you're running lots of Pandoras, it may not have as much value because she competes with Pandora for those wood orbs. Grizzar is one of the better farmable options actually available. He has fantastic awakenings. He has a 7-turn active that allows you to generate light to dark, and 1 turn of haste. So you're creating that system team. It's an option everyone can acquire at some point in time because it is farmable. Next is Hanzo, and Hanzo has another fire to dark orb change, powerful in itself, has dual killer awakenings, a reasonable sub all around. And I'm mentioning Dark Haku because she has perfect synergy with Akachi, because Akachi with Haku's board change, even though she doesn't generate hearts, will generate 1/3 hearts, 2/3 enhanced dark. So that's your burst potential. You burst, you kill things pretty much with that active. Obviously there's a bit of risk, but it's worth mentioning. Like, yes, Zuo does work, but Zuo requires more effort because you would have to use something like Sleeping Beauty in conjunction, and Zuo plus Sleeping Beauty results in 1/3 hearts, 1/3 dark, 1/3 fire. Like, it's just awkward. It's not as guaranteed good damage. It's just not as ideal in my opinion. So that's why I'm not mentioning Zuo. I'll mention it here though. So for utility skill inheritance bases, this is another thing you can use. You can use Awoken Lucifer, or even Lucifer in his Dark Fire form, where you have the 4-turn base cooldown. And with this Lucifer, basically you're able to basically use him as a base for skill inheritance. You can inherit those board changers on top of him, which can be important because you may lack natural board changers. Zerog Infinity is falling into utility category because he allows you to have haste, again closing the gap, farmable monster, as well as providing this dark Skyfall. And if you have enough haste, you can actually upkeep his Skyfall buff almost permanently. Rosiel is another pull from the Halloween collab, and she does have triple 2-prongs, she does have Recover Bind, and she's a pure Heart Maker. So she has some utility, you can inherit something on top of her, but obviously 2-prongs have less value on a row team, but it's something worth keeping in mind. And finally, Awoken Hades may be overlooked, but his gravity can be powerful because his gravity can override time debuffs. You can use the gravity to push bosses into more favorable zones or bypass resolve. It's worth mentioning because you might need him, especially with a lot of higher tier content, having resolve bosses that cannot be delayed or counterattacked. Damage Enhance is necessary when playing possibly only Annihilation level content. It may not be needed all the time, but Lubu might be one of your better options because he is bind immune, he has the Recover Bind, and he does have a massive 3x enhance for devil types. You can obviously inherit something on top of him. He can work as a pseudo bind clearing if you have enough hard ropes present, or you inherit a bind clearing active on top of him. One of the better damage enhancing options along with favorable stats. Awoken Vitra falls in the same category, but his damage enhance is lower than Lubu, but he does have slightly more offensive awakenings. Awoken Loki provides 2 turns of damage enhance along with a turn of haste, and the 2 turns is useful because it could allow you to conserve actives, but to be honest, you're probably needing actives anyways with Xiang Mei because you need to have at least 9 hard orbs for maximum damage, as well as at least 6 purple, so 15 orbs is quite a lot, so you're probably using actives anyways, so the 2 turns may only help you conserve maybe 1 active if you're lucky. You just don't have to use as many because maybe you can get away with 2 heart combos, maybe. And finally we have Nephilis, and she is an option. She does have high recovery, but her enhance is the weakest. It's 1.5 times for 2 turns, and she enhances Dark Orbs on the turn she's used. So basically, you have a strong burst on turn 1, but turn 2 is a lot more lackluster. So again, if I've missed anyone, please let me know, and I will adjust this article accordingly. So these are just sample teams, and when you're building teams, you obviously have to keep in mind your own monster box's limitations, but keep in mind your recovery values, and basically just try and use what you need to counter each dungeon. There's no perfect lineup like there was for Fire Xiang Mei. You don't need to, there's no like archetype you have to follow. You can adapt because you have so many Dark Devils you can draw upon. So adjust your team accordingly and bring the utility you need for the dungeon that you're fighting. So this is a question probably more asked for Fire Xiang Mei. The equivalent is, can I use non-Dark Devils? And I'm going to say it's a hard no. You really should not. There's so many Dark Devils available. Why gimp yourself for a 20.25 times attack card? It's not necessary. You have skill inheritance. You can use different bases. Like, just don't. Now, how does a system work? Now, I actually have another video of how a system works. I am not going to really post a video of I'm not going to really play this video. Like, I encourage you to watch the video. I'll probably make a separate post of how a system works because it's quite good information. But basically, a system allows you to cycle your actives quickly because you have haste. And there are 2 types of systems. There's the 4 haste active system, in which you have 4 cards like Friend Leader and yourself with 3, or yourself with 4, so on and so forth, with haste on at least a 7-turn cooldown. Because turn 1, you use haste 1, turn 2 is haste 2, turn 3 is haste 3, turn 4 is haste 4, and finally on turn 5, you can use haste 1 all over again. And just repeat, it goes through the cycle again. So that means 2 other cards that are not being used are charging up twice as fast because of all this haste. And some popular systems were the Xiang Mei, Sumire, Kaede, Awoken Cao Cao with her Scarlets. So something to keep in mind, but you can do this with your Halloween Xiang Mei. And the 6 haste active is basically using 3 actives every turn, and you're just cycling like turn 1 you use 1, 2, 3, turn 2 is 4, 5, 6, turn 3 is 1, 2, 3 again, repeat. I explained this maybe a bit more in depth on that video. There will be a post along of it, but you can click, it's a good watch, and it also shows the visuals of how a system works in practice. So with Haste and Halloween Xiang Mei, you actually have farmable options with your Grizzar and Zerg Infinity. So you can actually create the system yourself with farmable cards. You don't need to purchase Halloween Xiang Meis. Yes, they may not be as ideal because you can't stall as easily because of no heart generation, but it's a farmable option. And even if you don't have a true system, you're cycling your actives faster, which is great. If you have Awoken Pandora, you have Haste again, so on and so forth. So there are options of how you can use this to your advantage. It is viable, but you don't need to do it to succeed. So, skill inheritance. And skill inheritance is basically a way to customize subs to bring actives that you normally could not use because of type restrictions or colors. And Xiang Mei is no exception. And a lot of players, I think it's almost 100% necessary to inherit something on top of her, because yes, your active is good, but why not get a better active? Like, you may not use it, but it will protect you against skill delays, so on and so forth. So basically this chart kind of outlines various orb changes. I chose orb changes that make sense. You can, there's obviously more. Use your creativity, look in your monster box, just use this as a starting point. And again, I encourage you to read the Skill Inheritance Advanced Strategies article. It will elaborate a bit more of how to use skill inheritance to your advantage. And finally, we're coming to how you should do your Latent Awakening setup. Now, with Halloween Xiang Mei, it is a tanky team, and you don't necessarily need a specific set of latents to succeed, because your teams are going to vary because there's so many devils available. However, for Xiang Mei herself, I recommend either Recovery Latent Tamadras or Skill Delay Resist. Recovery Latent Tamadras provide 50 each, so each, like, that's a huge increase. And if you give basically 5, you're actually going to have 250 bonus recovery. That's huge. Like, dual leaders, that's 500 more recovery. Each heart combo is going to heal you 500 more. That's crazy good. If you have the recovery badge, 25% on top of that. That's another, it basically becomes a 625. Crazy. And skill delay resists are good in a very high-end or end-game content, because it basically allows you not to get delayed. You don't have to worry about stalling on dangerous floors, so on and so forth. Use them as necessary, but some players will tend to use, say, 2 as a good starting point, because with 2, and say you're delayed by 2 turns, or 1 turn, whatever it may be, if it's delayed by 2 turns, for instance, your Xiang Mei is unaffected. You use your active to hasten everyone up, make your match, and then on the next turn, everyone's ready again. That's kind of how the latents work. So, viability in today's meta. So this is perhaps like the meat of the article as well, because people want to know, is it worth it? So she is more powerful than her fire cousin, mostly because you have devils at your disposal, so your team varies. You don't have to use Gadius, Uriel, who are not necessarily the best subs. You have choices, as well as fire generally being a superior color due to less color restrictions or absorptions, whatever. Not absorptions, but like 50% less damage. So she is stronger, but she's not so much stronger that she's going to be propelled to like the top tiers on the Japan lists. Like, the thing is, it is a 2.25 times health team, and no matter how you spin it, it's not going to be strong enough compared to Heart Cross leaders, because your Halloween Xiang Mei, even in co-op, will probably never surpass 100,000 health. Like, maybe you will, maybe you won't, but a lot of attacks are going to hit harder than that, so you're not going to survive, and Heart Crosses will. Along with gravity-based attacks, you're not going to survive gravity, so no matter how hard you hit, if you can't survive, you're not going to win. Like, for instance, in Arena 3, you will die to Hera Dragon every single time. Like, you're not going to win. So automatically, that, like, right away, you have an 80% chance of winning, because you lose automatically to 1. The other ones are probably going to kill you as well, but you can at least have chances. But my point being is, you're not going to be as viable as a Heart Cross leader, and this is where it's problematic. Like, she is still powerful. You can clear tons of content. You can easily mow through Arena 2. You can mow through, like, possibly Machine Hera, so on and so forth. But the thing is, like, you're going to have, you're kind of buying you're buying into a card that is starting middle of the pack in terms of, like, good leaders. She's in the middle upper range. You're not at the top like Fire Xiang Mei was. So, moving forward, say, even just 6 months, where is she going to be? She's not going to go up. She's going to go down, if anything. Like, look at Fire Xiang Mei. She was at the top, and then 6 months later, she dropped significantly. Like, she's off the tier list in Japan. And Halloween Xiang Mei is like, maybe on the tier list, maybe not. But the thing is, you're buying into a leader who may have a low shelf life. Like, it's not going to be good in 6... it will still be good, but it's not going to be great in 6 months. Like, she's good to great now. She might just be good in 6 months. That's the problem, because the way of power creep works. Furthermore, we're going to get new Radar Dragon evolutions. Those are probably going to be stronger because, like, they are hard to acquire, for one. And the thing is, like, if you look at, say, Beach Miru by comparison to Halloween Xiang Mei, she also costs 500 monster points, but she is a top-tier leader by comparison. So you were buying into someone that's at the top of the leader spectrum, not middle-ish. So that's my personal opinion. Like, you could purchase her if you have lots of monster points, but the thing is, you're not going to be very good for very long. That's the problem. So that's the only downside. Like, It's unfortunate they made Xiang Mei like Halloween Xiang Mei like this. Like it's exciting, like it should be exciting, but it's just not going to be at the top of your game. Like it's going to clear lots of content, but it's still going to struggle in my opinion, especially 6 months down the road. So in conclusion, Halloween Xiang Mei is still a powerful leader right now. Her mileage will vary in the future, like how long is she going to last for, so on and so forth. Like it's hard to know. But the thing is, it's still strong. Like if you roll it from the collab, congrats. Like you just won like a mini lottery essentially. But purchasing her for 500,000 monster points is expensive, and it's because you're entering at the middle-ish. You're not entering at the top, so it's not really worth the investment in my opinion. Obviously, everyone can vary, and use your own judgment. Like you play Puzzle and Dragons for fun. You can't just let a crazy man who plays with himself tell you what to do. Like take my opinion with a grain of salt because everyone has different opinions and like everyone has different goals. You might love that playstyle. If you love that playstyle, definitely go for it. It will clear a lot of content for you. So let me know what you think of this article. Do you think you'd use her if you had her, or are you rolling for her, or you can purchase her? Just let me know. This entire article you're reading will be linked in the YouTube description below, so have a read there as well. Have a mantastic evening, and happy puzzling!